There we go. We are officially live. To those of you that are tuning in because you've pre-registered to this event, thank you for joining us. To those of you that are picking it up live on LinkedIn, stay with us. I think we've got a really interesting topic that we're talking about today. This is a follow-on from a series we've been running now for 12 months. Every month we dive in. We usually have external guests join us and we talk about a specific topic that is included in the wider topic of building an outbound sales team. Now, this month is a little different because we've decided not to invite along any external guests. And I've invited Marco Alfano-Rogers, who's our sales director here at Air and heads up our new business team, to help me concentrate on a topic that is something that a lot of my content preaches about. And I know Marco is very much the same. And that is looking at how you build an ROI forecast for an outbound sales team, how long it takes genuinely for an outbound sales operation to go from inception to return on investment, and what that journey looks like, and all of the things that can impact on that journey. And today we're going to run you through a tool that we use, our ROI forecast here at Air Marketing, to help you understand the methodology behind that and how we might approach that problem and that planning phase of building out an outbound team. If you're watching this live on LinkedIn, we'd love to get your questions. If you've got questions throughout this discussion, please do fire them into the comments and we'll do our best to try and respond to them and answer them in live time. But before we get stuck into this, Marco, firstly, thank you for joining me. I wonder if you want to give the audience a quick 2 minutes on your role within Air and why we're sort of contributing on this conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And it's good to be here. So just as a high-level introduction to myself, so I'm our sales director. So my role is to effectively win new clients. And actually, as part of the onboarding process, in fact, as part of the sales process, I build out these ROI forecasts. So when clients say, right, we want to use you guys to run an outsource SDR program, part of my role is to build out these forecasts in terms of expectations with clients. So I'm in and amongst them all day, every day. And actually, I talk to a lot of people within such a wide range of industries. So, SaaS, tech, finance. So we're dealing with a real variation in terms of average sale values, average sales cycles, different target markets, different ICPs, some targeting SMEs, some targeting CEOs in enterprise-sized businesses. So really interesting today to really touch on the variations and all the contributing factors to consider when looking at the ROI of an outbound SDR platform. So yeah, happy to be here and keen to get stuck into it.
Before we get into it though, I'm keen to just understand from you, what do you see as the common sort of myths and misconceptions of an outbound program? Because there's a reason we have this process. There's a reason we would encourage people to use this process if they were building an outbound team within their business internally. What are some of the running themes that you hear around people thinking, I'm guessing it takes, it ramps in 3 months, we get a return really quickly, we'll convert 80% of the meetings, those sorts of things you must hear regularly.
Absolutely. I think there's two main things. So firstly, it's the misconception around hiring an SDR team and kind of, or even, let's go with internally first. So hiring an SDR team and just expecting that SDR platform to perform. So you hire 2 or 3 SDRs, perhaps without an SDR manager, perhaps without that strategy piece, and you're effectively hiring salespeople. And there's a misconception that those salespeople typically will be able to build that strategy, which 9 times out of 10 isn't necessarily true. So first off, it's the strategy piece. So, the messaging, the branding, the ICP identification, the data, the systems, processes, objection handling, USBs, all of that great stuff, that needs to be done prior to actually executing an outbound SDR channel, whether that's, done internally or I guess outsourced. The other thing is looking at an outbound program, basing it on inbound metrics. So what I mean by that is conversion rates, attendance rates, all of the metrics that, all these SDR managers and VPs are looking at, but actually people people sometimes base the outbound metrics on, you know, a high performing inbound team. And actually it's very, very different. And we can go into that in a little bit more detail, but those are probably two things that I hear the most.
There's a separate conversation on inbound versus outbound, isn't there? And I think what's interesting today is we're going to dive into some of the key metrics. We're going to use this hour if you join us for all of it, but if not, hopefully you get some takeaways and you can always watch the recording back to work through a couple of scenarios, best case, worst case, and look at what that might actually mean when it comes to return. Now, one of the things we will accept using this tool is that it's fairly basic, it's fairly rudimentary, it's meant to be that way so that we're not overcomplicating it. But out of it, we should get a general feel around what an SDR program can and will look like from a return perspective. So, Marco, I'm going to dive into it. This is our ROI forecast, and what we're displaying over the course of the first 12 months, you can see about 11 on the screen here at the moment, it is ultimately what's the output from the program, how many meetings are we booking, how many new clients are we winning, how long does it take for us to get there. All of that is kind of irrelevant until we look at the inputs. And that's what I'm going to do first. I'm just going to zoom us into this part here over the side. And I'm going to just spend a bit of time with you, Marco, just running through some example metrics. So you'll see on the screen here, we are looking at a resource level in this scenario of 150 hours. Now, the reason we work on hours is because we'd be pretty naive to put one full-time person in there and assume that a full-time person in one organization has the same amount of active selling as they do in another organization. So if you think about the number of hours in a week, and we're doing a lot of rounding here, somebody might work 40 hours, 8-hour days, 9 till 5, 40 hours in a week, 160 hours across a month, 170 if it's a calendar month rather than a 4-week period. We're working on roughly 4-week periods here just to keep the maths nice and simple. And then, of course, you've got to build in some time where they're not actively selling, where they're being trained, they're being developed, they're working on, they're being coached by their manager, they're working on improving, they're in one-to-ones, in internal meetings, all that sort of stuff. So if we look at this from an internal perspective, Marco, in your experience, how much time is an SDR actually spending selling each month or each week?
To be honest, it varies massively. It's all down to the strategy, the proposed strategy per SDR. I talk to a lot of companies where they run internal SDR functions, and it's very, phone focused, bit of data, outbound, way more transactional, and that allows the SDRs to be, pretty productive in terms of, it's 8:30 on a Monday all the way through to 5 p.m. on a Friday. So that's one thing. I also talk to other people that have in-house SDR teams that are, very much multi-channel, utilizing sequences, cadences, 5 or 6 different pieces of sales technology. Now with that, it's slightly different because there's weekly training sessions, there's weekly feedback sessions. I think it takes away a little bit of some productivity focus. So actually, what could be a 36, 37, 38 hour week is actually more like 25 to 30. So we do get a massive variation depending on the strategy.
Well, look, let's take an example. I think what's clear to most people, and I think that the people in the audience would agree, and guys, put in your comments, ask questions, give us your feedback as we run through this. This is a live document that we can work with. Let's take an argument of 125 hours a month per rep. I don't think that's unreasonable. If you've got 160 to 170 working hours, by the time you add in some learning development, some distraction time, some one-to-one time, all that kind of stuff, and some coaching.
So just to put that into perspective, then we're saying across 4 weeks, for example. I know some months are slightly longer. That's 31.25 hours a week,
which is 4 days, right? It's an 80% ratio. I think HubSpot released a piece of data last year that said the reps on average spend 14 to 15% of their time in internal meetings alone. So you take that out, and then of course you've got to factor in that internally they'll have annual leave, sick days, all the rest of it. So I think even at 125 hours per rep, you're probably running fairly optimistically. And for the sake of this exercise, let's run on a team. Let's run on 2 reps. So let's call it 250 hours in that resource level. We've got 250 hours of active selling time in each month. Now, you touched on the points of sequences, cadences, multi-channel. I've purposely brought an example here that's focused on one channel, phone.
Perfect.
Partially because I think it's easier to understand, and we're not trying to build in
absolutely.
multiple conversion rates on multiple channels. But also, if you're starting something for the first time, my advice would be keep it simple anyway, to some degree. So I want to keep this reasonably simple. We've got a limited amount of time to touch on. So whilst you're right in terms of the multi-channel, I'm gonna focus this in on one channel with phone calls.
Yeah, definitely, and I would agree. It keeps it far more simpler. So yeah, I'm happy with that.
And then let's run down. So cost of recruitment, setup, data, onboarding. I mean, again, we've got to put a number in here. It's fairly light in terms of £10,000. If you, by the time you hire 2 SDRs, even if you get one of them via a recruitment company, one of them organically, you're £5,000 to £7,000 down, maybe 8 or 9 if you're using niche agencies, and some agencies will charge that amount. You've got to think about the fact that, what else have you got to get them? Laptop, training time where they're coming in, they're not actively selling. There's a whole heap of costs there that you've got to factor in. Yeah,
stuff like management time. You mentioned it, onboarding time, phone systems, all of that good stuff. It adds up.
It does. So I think, look, 10 grand for me is it's a nice round number. What we don't want to be doing is scaring people off. We want to give people, a sensible figure in here, but understand that can be a lot more and a lot less, depending on the way that you approach it. And then in there, we're going to run with a monthly cost per SDR. Now, this is an interesting one, because I think you talk a lot, Marco, about the fact that people don't tend to factor in all of the costs that are associated with having an SDR bum on seat. So let's put a number in there per SDR. Obviously, we'll need to double it because we've got 2 in this team. Yeah. What do you tend to base it on?
Again, it varies massively. Specifically SaaS tech, you've got to be looking 5-6 grand a month at least per SDR. Once you take into consideration salary, commission, time with the phone, and all the costs surrounding an SDR per month, it's got to be in that figure as an average. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think the things that people forget. So the really basic way of looking at it is, average SDR salary is £31,000 at the moment. I think it is. So 31 divided by 12 equals X, and that's the number I'm running with.
You got national insurance on top of that.
Correct. Most people will at least take the time to say, I've got to factor in commission on top of that, which realistically, minimum another 10K a year. So let's take that from 30 to 40 grand.
Yeah, at least.
National insurance on top of that, running at sort of circa 7-9%, depending on how much you're paying that person.
Yeah.
Tech licenses. So are you giving them sales enablement tools? Are you giving them data tools? Are you giving them LinkedIn Navigator licenses? Are you giving them a phone system that they've got to run with? Are they on air call, which is £90 a month, whatever it might be? I think realistically that cost even at 60 grand a year, all in, 5 grand a month is probably light, depending on where you're based. And
absolutely,
could you run it at 50? Yeah, probably. Are you getting the best SDRs at that level? Maybe not. You're certainly going entry level. And I think if you're running at 60k a year, if you're running above 60k a year, you're moving into the 5,000 to 6,000 mark.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd be tempted, for the sake of this. Let me put that back in at 10k. Pressing the wrong buttons here. I'd be tempted to put that in at 5.5 for the sake of this exercise.
Absolutely. I think it's probably worth noting, if we did this exercise 2.5 years ago, I think these numbers would be very different in terms of the cost, right? It's a different market out there. It's a real candidate-driven market. So the cost of hiring an SDR and paying an SDR team on a continuous basis is significantly more than it has ever been, which is great, right? Let's celebrate that. They do a very, very good job, and so be it. But it's worth highlighting that it's a different market than what it was.
I think that's a really valid point. I think we were talking at a sales confidences event late last year where we had 4 people on the stage, 2 of whom were saying we're paying up to 30 or 40% more on basics for an SDR in the current market. Absolutely. So, I think you could drive that number right up for certain circumstances.
Yeah.
Keen not to scare people off Outbound too much today, so let's keep it at a moderate number. But I think it's a great topic of discussion. And I think that realistically, $5,500 in for an SDR, what you've got to factor in beyond that as well is CRM and another license.
Yeah.
At some point, if you've got a team, you've got to have an SDR manager, or you've got to split that salary across the number of SDRs that you've got in that team, whether that's a team of 6, 7, 8, whatever your ratio. You're working towards. It certainly shouldn't be more than 8 or 10.
Yeah, that actually that links back to the point that I mentioned earlier on, where I'm talking to people that want to go and hire an SDR team and just kind of bypass that SDR manager piece. Well, actually, once you get to 2, 3, 4 SDRs, they can't manage themselves. They've got to have a leader. They've got to have that strategy. Now you've got that extra salary on top. So yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah. And even if you look at if you've got one SDR, I mean, I think it's always a mistake to hire one person in a new role by themselves anyway, because where's the benchmark? Where's the teamwork? Where's the competitive nature? All that sort of stuff. But even with one, they're going to need a lot of support, probably more support, because they don't have that peer to bounce off of. Yeah, and that if you're not hiring an SDR manager, well, where's that going? It's going into the founder, the CEO, the VP of sales. How much time is there? How much is their time worth, and what could they be doing with that time?
Yeah,
and it's not light touch outbound. It's really high maintenance, a lot of work in the early stages. So I really do think all in package wise, if you start layering it all in and being honest about it, that number could be a lot higher.
Absolutely. Yeah, agreed.
So let's look at this one. Let's get into what they actually do. So as I said, for this exercise, we're looking at one channel, number of phone calls that they can make. You could have that as email. You could have that as LinkedIn. You could have that as whatever you want to from a channel perspective, videos sent. This example, we're going to use calls per hour. We've got the number 10 in there. It's a round number, nothing more. What are the things that you see influence call rate? What are the things that you see? What sort of range of call rates do you see across programs?
Great question. Again, I'm going to say this every time on it. It varies massively, but it does. So yeah, I would say anywhere between 8 to 12, 13, perhaps slightly higher if it is SME focused. Yeah, put it this way: the more conversations we're having, the longer our conversations, the less calls the guys will be making, the less calls you'll see from an outbound SDR. Obviously, longer conversations, more conversation, less calls. Now, if we flip that and say, right, we're targeting C-level execs, enterprise businesses, our contact rate, and just giving you guys watching this, in our world, we say a contact rate is a percentage of phone calls that result in a decision maker conversation. And Owen's going to go into that shortly. But if we see a high contact rate, which means we're having lots of conversations, our call rates will drop. If we see a low contact rate, we should, in theory, see a higher call rate. So yeah, size of organization is an influencer, level of decision maker is an influencer, and actually Owen's point around the multi-channel stuff, that 10 calls per hour, it's a good one to work with because that actually allows for a bit of room on stuff off the phone. Bits like sending email, doing a bit of research prior, LinkedIn connections, all that good stuff. So I'm liking that 10 calls per hour. I think for something like this, it's going to be very conservative. So keen to see what it does to the numbers.
I think the one commentary I would add to that is, I'm a bit old school, being old enough to be your dad, Marco, I think is what they say around the office in some cases.
I look older than you, don't
I? That's just the moisturizer. I think that for me, in the early stages of an outbound program, if we're genuinely looking at this as never having done it before, built within organization, actually, if I was running it, I'd be saying, let's focus on getting as many calls in as possible, getting as many conversations on the phone as possible, because we learn from a two-way conversation. Even if it's not the right channel, we don't learn from emails that don't get a response, email that don't get a response. And I'd be tempted to say, well, let's look at pushing that up, see if we can get a couple of extra calls in an hour. We're not talking, let's strip out the admin, let's strip out the stuff that gets in the way of us going and having conversations. Realistically, we're not nowadays working where every other call lands with the conversation, and the conversation could be 5-10 minutes long. Exactly. We're landing where 12 calls an hour on a 10% contact rate gets you 1.2 conversations an hour. If I'm speaking to 1 or 2 people an hour, filling the rest of the time with 10, 11 calls feels like it should be a good place to start. And management-wise, and this is just my strategic mind, I guess, I tend to think towards in the early stages, let's focus on quantity, speed of learning rather than quality, because we don't yet know what right looks like. So it's guesswork.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And actually, we had an example of this. A client joined us just before Christmas 2021. They had an in-house outbound SDR team, and that SDR team were very much focused on enterprise. They used us to drive SME opportunities.
Yeah.
And they were very much focused on LinkedIn messaging, emails, this, that, and the other. And the account manager and I sat down and said, look, awesome strategy, love it for enterprise, but for what we're going to do, which is SME, middle management, let's take out 90% of that off the phone activity and drive human to human conversations. And we saw really high call rates, great contact rates, and really, really good conversion rates. And that actually made them flip their mentality internally in terms of let's push the phone more than ever. So yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah, very interesting. Hey, we've got a question from the audience. I'll pop it up on the screen. From Karen Seals, do you feel the flip to more senior decision makers working from home has affected how we view what realistic call and contact rates are now? Great question, Karen. Thank you. Appreciate that. Marco, do you want to respond to that?
I'll let you go first.
Okay, fair enough. Throw me under the bus, no problem. So I think I think it's changed, hasn't it? The landscape has definitely changed. We are seeing, as we measure this data on a daily, weekly, monthly basis within our business, and there are some inputs that influence that, one of which is which clients are we working for or not working for, and what markets do they go into, because that will naturally influence the average if we're doing more work on a campaign that's easier to get hold of people or harder to get hold of people. But we do enough work across enough campaigns that we can kind of see a trend. I think certainly 2020, the shock was that we went from averaging fairly consistently 1 in 10 to 1 in 8 to 10 calls connecting with a decision maker. So sort of 10 to 12% of the phone calls we make connecting with a decision maker. And that very swiftly dropped to under 5% fairly consistently for a good 3 to 6 months. And I think when you look at particularly the SME market, they moved towards having to sort out their technology to allow people to actually answer the phone from home in many cases, in an environment where people never had worked from home. And in enterprise, they moved towards more Slack, Teams communication, Zoom calls, and less towards the phone. So we definitely saw an impact then. What we have seen over the last 18 months since then, though, is a steady creep back to much, much closer to where it was pre-COVID. So I think that we have to be realistic. We still have to, in all reality, make more phone calls to have a conversation with the decision maker than we did pre-2020. But the difference between pre-COVID and now is a lot smaller than it perhaps was at the beginning of the pandemic. So I think the numbers we're working with here are taking the data into account that we're seeing across the market at the moment versus what we perhaps had 2, 3, 4 years ago. Marco, would you add anything or challenge anything there?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. First 3 months of most of the country effectively being sent home overnight with a laptop. I certainly was, and if someone wanted to get hold of me, they physically couldn't on the phone. It was tough for us, right? But I think 3 months in, I think companies soon realised, right, we now need to set our team up with the infrastructure to be able to work from home. So online phone systems and being able to take a call from a laptop and work phones and all that good stuff. So as you said, we've seen a steady trajectory in terms of an increase in contact rates, which is great. But again, we need to be realistic in the fact that it is tough. We need to make more calls. We need to be clever, right? We can't just keep doing the same things that we've been doing for a number of years, and I think that goes across the whole industry, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think, look, going back to, Kerry is a really good point. I think this comes back to we're building this out in a fairly simplistic way for ease of understanding if you're seeing it for the first time. If you were building an outbound strategy for the first time now, you would definitely be factoring in other channels. Do I need to use other channels? Do the decision makers, particularly in enterprise, do they hang out elsewhere? Are they better to be contacted on LinkedIn, on email? And then you just build in the fact that it's not just calls per hour, but you've got how many calls, how many emails, how many LinkedIns am I going to send, and what are the particular metrics that flow through off the back of those? and they all can then feed into one place together. So
absolutely.
Thank you, Karen. Fantastic question. I'm going to move us on to what we call contact rates, also known as dial to connect. So this is the percentage of dials that actually result in a conversation with the right person. We kind of touched on it a little bit there. Now, the haters would have us think that it's about 2 to 3%. Mainly, got a lot of tech and SaaS solutions coming over from the US, where they do see much lower dial to connect ratios, and that brings region into this for the first time. So to give you some commentary around that, where we might see 8, 9, 10% average in the UK, there are obviously some things that influence whether you're the higher or lower part of any given range. The US might be half of that. APAC, however, can be double that. So typically over in APAC, you're running at sort of 20, 22%, 1 in 5 calls resulting in a conversation with the decision maker. Fact is, they pick up the phone more. I can't tell you why. There's a cultural piece there, but it's a lot easier to run a successful outbound program in APAC than it is Europe, and then a lot easier in Europe compared to the US on average. So let's just get that bit out of the way. In the UK, and we're focused primarily on the UK, Europe to some degree here, you won't see connect rates of 2-3% unless you are dialing straight into FTSE 500 enterprise, C-level, who are just very, very difficult to get hold of. Marco, what's a sensible number for us to put in this, and what are the things that you see influence contact rate? Let's focus on the UK.
Okay, let's build a case study then. So talk about size of the organization. So we look at employee count. Actually, let's look at industry, employee count, and turnover. So give me those three, and then I can give you the context as to an expected contact rate.
Okay, so let's say mid-market, 50 to 500 employees, 2, 3, 4 million revenue, depending on the stage that they're at and whether they're funded and growing or whether they're mature, up to 15, 20 million pounds as an organization. What do you want, sector?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's keep it fairly broad, and let's take it, 4 or 5 sectors. So SaaS, technology, fintech, finance. We've got a fairly broad target market for this case study. So you can sort of average it out rather than be too niche and specific.
Yeah, and then level of decision maker within that organization, for example. What
heads of department, not CEO, not C-level, not middle management. Heads of department. Let's go.
I would say probably up to 10%. Somewhere between 8 to 10% would probably be fair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. I'd be tempted to say, it depends on the blend of data, doesn't it? You've got more of the companies that are that are turning over 15, 20 million, and fewer of the ones that are turning 2 or 3. Yep. Obviously things like brand impact on this. So to give you a real life case study, we have a reseller of a technology product, and the brand of the technology product is a household name. The reseller's name is not. Having A/B tested it, the same number of calls into the same data set, you run at about twice the contact rate by using the household brand name over the one that people don't recognize. So things like that have a huge impact. If I'm calling people and I'm phoning from Microsoft, let's say, or Apple, trust me, people are going to want to take that call far more regularly than they would if you're phoning from Air Marketing, who in the grand scheme of things, people don't know. Even down to things like your company name. What does it sound like? What's the immediate impact or thought that people have?
Just on that point, Owen, I've actually seen quite a bit on LinkedIn around SDRs not being able to influence contact rates. I actually personally think they can. They absolutely can. An SDR being able to influence a contact rate is their ability to engage with a gatekeeper and get that gatekeeper on side, allowing you to get through to a decision maker. So, there's only so much you can do to influence contact rate, but getting that gatekeeper on your side can only make that contact rate better.
And look, sales is about marginal gains, particularly in outbound. So if I can get 1 in 100 gatekeepers to put me through where they otherwise wouldn't have across a year, that's a lot of conversations that I'm going to have. I'm going to have an extra 500 conversations or whatever it might be across the year, which might be the difference in me getting my meeting quota or revenue quota versus not getting it. And if I can do that in multiple places across the sales process and the sales funnel and sales cycle, then I'm going to be, well, it's multiplication theory, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So what we're not saying is that SDRs can influence, that you can always get through a gatekeeper, or you can never get through a gatekeeper. What you can do is improve 1, 2, 3% of your chances, so that across a sustained period, you're having more conversations than you otherwise would.
Exactly.
And I think it's a really good point. So look, let's leave that in at 8%. I think it's a realistic number. I don't think we're a million miles away. I think that if we overlay those 2 bits of data, we're making 12 calls. 8% of those allowing us to speak to a decision maker. We're speaking to one person an hour, rounding it more or less on average. I don't think that's unfair or unrealistic. It does give you a sense of how on the ball. You've got to always give the SDR phone analogy, like the goalkeeper in football. You might have a brilliant team in front of you and have to do nothing for 89 minutes. You've got to be ready when you're called upon. It's the same here. You might work really hard to get hold of somebody. You might not talk to somebody for 2 or 3 hours. When you do, you've got to be on your game. You've got to be ready to give the best presentation you can possibly give. So I think we've got an example in there. I think your point there is, that might range from 2 or 3% in contact rate up to 15% realistically.
Absolutely. It really is. When doing these, it really is a case of the proposed strategy. So there is so much that can influence those contact rates. So it's not like, we can just take a kind of high level strategy and chuck some numbers in. That will give us, that'll give us a good projection. But it's not until we get to the real detail around data and size of organisation, ICP, all that good stuff, where we can really be specific with that contact rate. That's why I like to always give a range.
Agreed. All right. So I'm looking over here because I've got it up on the big screen as well. So let's say that's what's happening. We're now getting hold of decision makers. And my question to you is, what percentage of those people do we speak to? Can we book a meeting with?
I just lost you for about 3 seconds though. Could you say that again?
So we've got hold of the people. We're talking to people on the phone. We're having conversations with decision makers. What percentage of those can we realistically get to a position where they're agreeing to a meeting, where we feel we've qualified them well enough, and where they're saying yes to put some time in the diary?
So my standard response to that is somewhere, again.
Let me guess.
It does. Probably that. It will vary somewhere between 5 to 10%. So let me give you some context on that. And actually that goes back to your branding point as well. So your brand will influence conversion rate. I mean, there's 101 things that will influence a conversion rate, but I just popped into my head, who you're calling from will certainly influence that as well. But conversion rates will vary massively. It falls down to the qualifying criteria. So if you were to, if we were to say, right, okay, what constitutes as a meeting? So conversion rate, again, just to reiterate it, a percentage of people that we talk to that result in a qualified opportunity, a meeting, an appointment, a lead, an SQL, however you want to frame that. Now, I hear so many variations of what an SQL is or what constitutes an appointment. So I think it's fair to highlight that actually conversion rates will depend on qualifying criteria. If you went with a strict band, had to have a load of budget, happened to be the decision maker, oh, wow, there's a massive need here, and I want to implement your software next week. You're not going to get many of those out there. So you'd see fewer conversion rates. If we're going to take a realistic approach and say, actually, look, let's leave budget aside, and I'm talking out loud here, but it's got to be with a decision maker. Obviously, there's got to be a need and time frame. Should this get down the line, this is something that they could implement. It's always tricky with budget because, if you're a SaaS company who just launched a SaaS solution, a lot of these decision makers won't typically know that this piece of software is out there or this solution is out there. So how could they budget for something that they didn't know existed? So, I think if we're being pretty fair and a fairly strict criteria, somewhere between 5 to 10% is a fair conversion rate. That being said, we do see slightly higher. We have run campaigns where we see up to 20%. I mean, it's not very often, but most campaigns we see will sit at the higher end of between 5 to 10%. And what are your thoughts?
Well, it also depends on what you constitute as a meeting, right? So if you take the classic, connect and sell approach, and kudos to them, they're very good at what they do, and they've got a very clear strategy, which they share loads of insight, content, expertise on. It's, if you've got 27 seconds to tell you why I called, I'm basically calling to get a meeting in the diary to tell you why I called. And I'm being facetious a little bit to some degree, but What they're not doing, they're telling you what they've found a breakthrough that eliminates X, Y, and Z. Have you got 15 minutes? All I'm calling for today is to get 15 minutes in your diary to tell you a bit more about it.
Yeah.
And they're just going straight in for the close. They're not qualifying. They're not trying to talk, they're not trying to get people out of the meeting. They're not trying to identify why that meeting might not be a good use of time. They're trying to just get them to agree to it and then do the qualification afterwards.
Exactly.
That will get you a higher conversion rate to meeting, but the quality of the meeting will be less. In theory, less likely to qualify, less likely to be the right kind of business, less likely to be the right person as well within the company. Absolutely. Depending on the data research piece that you do up front, if you've got really, very good data, you can probably afford to do that. If you're learning as you go, in this instance, early stage, you probably want a bit more qualification. And that's not me talking down connectors, so they do a fantastic job, but they've nailed their data strategy. They know who they want to talk to, and they know everything about them. They know a lot about them, so they can be confident going in that the only goal is to book a meeting. When you're building an outbound program for the first time, you've got to have the goal of actually identifying, is this the right person within the right organization that has the kind of need that my product or service can help solve a problem for? And I think that's a different one. So I think a 5 to 10% ratio is good. I'm going to put in a 8% for the sake of this exercise. I would say anything over 10%. Realistically, if 1 in 10 people in my market have got the problem right now, the right time frame to solve the decision, and I'm speaking to the right person who can own that and all that kind of stuff, I'm doing pretty well. I think if it's any less than 3-4%, we've probably got the messaging wrong. We're probably not, we're not communicating our value prop well enough. So let's run it at 8 for the sake of this exercise. Just
one more thing. It's the end outcome as well. End outcome will dictate conversion rate. So, if it's a face-to-face meeting, typically you'll probably see a low conversion rate. If it's a phone call or if it's a demo book, so you probably see a high conversion rate. Oh, is it worth just whilst we've got people looking at this, just going through months 1, 2, and 3, because we like to build in a ramp up in terms of our conversion rate. So when we go at this from, no pipeline, completely cold, let's be really conservative in the first month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, whatever we agree on. It's not until, really months 5, months 6, where we can say, okay, we can now start seeing a real consistent conversion rate whilst pipelines come to fruition. We're at version 4, 5, 6 of, let's call it a script, but a structured organization.
Let's look at those inputs. Yeah, absolutely. So carrying across, so if we've got our 250 resource hours a month, the based on the call rate we've estimated, which is 12, it's going to be 3,000 phone calls made a month. A lot of phone calls. That's going to result in 240 conversations in your addressable market with decision makers. I think in terms of volume, that's good. I think that's in line with what we'd expect. Now, we've maxed this out at 8%. So we're saying that we are going to book 8% of the conversations that we have with decision makers into meetings. But across our first 4 months, so this being month 1, 2, 3, 4, as you can see, we've built in, and the traffic light system makes it nice and easy for you to understand, that ramp of an SDR, that ramp of a program, as you refine messaging, test different things and work out what does and doesn't work. So, 3% month 1, 4% month 2, 5% month 3, 7% month 4. Is it going to be straight line like that? No, you can bet your bottom dollar it isn't. But it just indicates the journey. If you're going to get to 8%, the point is it doesn't happen overnight. It's going to happen over a 3 to 6 month period when it comes to messaging, top of funnel booking meetings.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think
disagree with it.
No, you hit the nail on the head. Nothing more to add to that. I think that that's entirely fair.
And what's interesting though is, if you are starting this outbound program, let's not look at cost for a moment, but in the space of 4 months, I can get my team up to booking circa 4 to 5 meetings a week for me. So now I've got 4 to 5 meetings a week in my diary from 2 SDRs that in theory are in my addressable market, agreed to meet, qualified to a reasonable level. I think when you start to see that, you start to see the impact. But what's interesting is 2 SDRs aren't producing 500 meetings. They're not producing none, and they're not producing thousands. It doesn't, it's a realistic number where you're saying actually a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 a week for an SDR, 1 every day, day and a half, 2 days, something like that is a really good starting point for a brand new outbound operation where the sales value is reasonable. Of course, sales value will influence it. If your sales value is pretty low, you've got to be pretty quick at getting meetings, and you should be fairly quick. And equally, if your sales value is hundreds of thousands of pounds, these numbers are going to look very different. But
Mhm.
we're taking a sort of mid-market, middle of the road account here. So this is spitting out 7 meetings in your first month, 17 by month 4, and then it plateaus out when we get to that 8% at around 20 meetings, 19.2. We know you can't put 0.2 of a meeting, by the way, it's an average. And that gives you a sense as to where you're running at with 2 reps. When it's mature, average of 20, you're going to get ups and downs based on time of year, pipeline, whether it's you filling the top of your pipeline or you're now moving things through to meeting a bit more. But it gives you a sense of the level. And I think 2 reps booking 20 meetings a month, it's not outside of the realms of normal, is it?
No, I'll be pretty happy with that.
So let's just run through then. So our next data point input is percentage of opportunities that turn up to a meeting and where there's actually an opportunity. So this is an interesting one because I think this is a bit that a lot of people don't factor in. The fact that you might book a meeting, but I'll tell you right now, they don't all turn up when you think they're going to. Even sometimes when you've had a really good conversation, you feel like it's right, and they're gone. What do you see in this? What do you think we should be putting in there?
Great question. Let's put it to 70%.
Yeah.
Let's see what that does.
70% turning up and being qualified.
Yeah, I'd say let's keep it at 70%, based on this target market, based on this strategy that we've discussed.
Yeah.
This actually is a really interesting one. Because this goes back to that strategy piece that I spoke about initially, where you hire 2 or 3 salespeople, kind of expect them to do their thing, and then everyone turns up to the meetings and you convert everything. It's all happy days. Well, actually, in reality, booking a meeting is just a tiny piece of that end goal and part in that, really, at the end of the day. So there's so many things that you can be doing as an outbound department, as an outbound team, to influence what that attendance rate and qualification or qualified percentage, whatever you want to call it, looks like. So I'm just throwing things out there, stuff like, if you didn't know how to do this properly, you get your SDR team to go out there, book a meeting, and you turn up right. But have you called them the day of the meeting? Have you got that SDR to send them a reminder email? Have you sent them a calendar invitation? Is it face to face? Is it Teams? There's so much out there in terms of systems and processes through reminders and all that good stuff, which will influence those percentages. So it's a really interesting topic. Whilst I'm talking, I think let's drop that from 70 to 60. Keep it at 60 for the time being.
I'm glad you said that. I was going to challenge you on that exact thing. I think realistically, in a virtual world, we're seeing more meetings not turn up first time, easier to drop out of, and then you've got to factor in, an opportunity is like something I'm going to spend my time on. You've got to allow salespeople to have the right to say no and to qualify out.
Absolutely.
To some degree.
Yeah, I was looking. That 70% I was looking at. That's actually our metrics. And the qualification that we've got is quite strict in terms of the appointment confirmation. So that's why we see a slightly higher percentage. But I think 60 is absolutely fair. We can play with that number. Let's see what that number does.
And ultimately, the more you qualify out, in theory, the higher the next number is, because you're spending more time on the right opportunities and vice versa. So sales isn't always about isn't all about quantity. It's sometimes about quality as well. So we're moving through and we're looking at the opportunity to close ratio. So 60% of the meetings we book are going to turn up and be an opportunity. Of those opportunities, now we're pretty strong at this. I know that's it takes time to mature and get there. But what we've got 15% in there as an example. What do you see as a range? I know it will vary. So where's the sort of minimum you'd expect that to be, and where would be the maximum you'd see that?
If your conversion rate from meeting to new business, so sorry, there's so many different acronyms that we use. So let's use what's in the spreadsheet. If your conversion rate is less than opportunity to close, in terms of a ratio, if it's less than 5%, I'd say there's definitely something going on that needs to be addressed. We see percentages up to 20%, but again, that would depend on average sale value and average sales cycles. I'd say 20% is pretty high. Naturally, so some of our clients that already have high performing outbound SDR teams with SDR to AE. They've got systems and processes. They use us as, additional resource to sit alongside their in-house team. That's typically where we see higher conversion rates, because they're 2 or 3 years into that outbound sales engine piece. So, they know they're very good at that next level sales process. So they're going to be at the higher end, but, companies that are testing, trying, measuring this for the first time, they will be down at the 5, 6, 7% as a range.
And look, I guess it comes down to maturity. If you wanted
Exactly.
to exercise, you could build in that growing over a period of time as well, quarter to quarter, 6 monthly, 6 month periods, whatever. I think for the sake of this, we'll keep it really simple. Let's run it at 15%. I think 15% is a really nice number. I've seen that up as high as 30 or 40%, but like you say, with mature sales teams, where the qualification criteria is spot on, the product is spot on, their sales process is spot on. They've been doing it for years. And they know what good looks like. So you've got to book the right meetings in the first place. I don't think we can reach that off the bat.
Absolutely. It's not the norm to be up at that, is it really?
No.
Great.
Yeah. And then last two. So average sales price. For this example, I don't think we have any need to change it. We've put in a revenue line of 20K. Now, let's be fair. It depends on what you count as revenue. So if you're working on ARR or MRR, we're saying this is for year one revenue. So we're accounting for the first year. Your job then to go and check to make sure they don't churn. So you might get 5 years of revenue at this ratio out of them. Equally, you might work on a rolling contract and people can stop and they might dive out after 3 months or 6 months. And I think that's down to you as to how you structure this. To keep it simple, we've put in a figure. What revenue can you attribute to the outbound activity based on contracts, committed contracts? We know that it's not going to put the cash in your bank on that particular day unless you're lucky enough to get paid up front for your services, your products, for a year or whatever it might be. And look, a lot of SaaS products do that nowadays. They pay up front for a year. And we're getting the revenue up front, but for now it's more of an accrual basis. So 20 grand, let's leave it there unless you've got any particular concerns with that figure, Marco. I think we're working on what's that, 1,800 a month or something like that. It's not a big number. And then if we work that backwards to the next, or we work forwards into the next bit, which is sales cycle. So for our sales cycle, how many months does it take on average? And I've never heard anyone answer this question without saying it depends. So we know it depends. How many months does it take for you to win business from meeting to close revenue from outbound for the first time in your first year of doing it?
I think let's start at 6 months and work back. If you're selling a £200 a month SaaS solution, it's going to be far shorter. But I think as an average across all the industries we work in, I think 6 months is always pretty fair. That being said, we've got clients who've got an 18-month sales cycle, but I think 6 months is a nice starting point. Cool.
So let's leave it there. I think that's fair. And I think my point would be, inbound sales cycles running at 90 days is fairly normal for a 20K sales value.
Absolutely.
You might see 60, and if you've got it nailed, you might see 30. But most people measure their averages by talking about their best case rather than the actual averages. For something to come in average 6 months, that allows for people to come in 90 days, but it also allows for those sales that take 9, 12 months, which will push the average up. So if we just run through that, we've got 2 reps doing 250 hours of active selling every month. We've got I've got a 1,000. We've got 10,000 cost of onboarding, recruitment fees, that sort of stuff. We've got a £5,500 a month running cost per rep. So I'm actually going to double that number because I need to put that in for 2 reps. 12 calls an hour per rep, 8% of those dials resulting in a conversation with the decision maker, and also 8% of those conversations resulting in a meeting. 60% of those meetings both turning up and attending the meeting and being deemed to be an opportunity, a qualified opportunity. 15% of those opportunities becoming closed revenue at an average sales value of 20K and an average sales cycle of 6 months. This is outbound only, not inbound. And interestingly, I've just had a note to say, that we ran a recent poll on LinkedIn to ask people to give their opinions around, is Q1 too soon to measure return? and which of the metrics would we focus on first during that period if we can't get a return. It's interesting to see that 57% of people said the meetings, the quality and the quantity of meetings is what they
That's
measure
interesting.
in the first quarter. 14% said pipeline, agreed callbacks, people that are saying, give me a call back in the future. And 29% said the quality of the conversation. So actually listening to the calls and understanding whether the messaging is working. So I think the market agrees with us when we're saying, look, the first 2 months is a learning period. Let's have a look at what this does. And I think what we're looking at is meetings and revenue for a period of time. So I'm just going to take the 12-month period, which you can now see on your screen. We've got 258 hours of active selling, 300 calls being made by the reps per month. I'm going to put it up so you can actually see. Sorry, 3,000. We've got 240 conversations with decision makers. This doesn't allow for fluctuation. We know that. And then we've got our conversion rate to meetings ramping across the first 4 months. Means we're going to be ramping up to about 20 meetings a month per rep. Now, there's a couple of bits that we haven't touched on so far. Those 7 meetings that we book in month 1, on the most part, they're going to flow through to month 2 to being face-to-face meetings. Now, we know that's not the case. The ideal would be that you set a meeting on the first of the month and you sit it on the second of the month. The reality is you're probably going to get that meeting in the back half of the month, and it might be in 2 weeks' time. So we take a default of pushing those meetings through to the next month. We know it doesn't work like that. Some can be longer and a lot can be shorter. You can get them in the same month. But for the sake of trying to model this on a worst case, modest example, rather than always assuming best case, we do that just to make it realistic. And then we allow for a 6-month period from those meetings to flow through, because we've built in a 6-month sales cycle. So surprise, surprise, if we've got a 6-month sales cycle, guess what? The first 6 months, our number of sales coming in is 0. Interesting, right? Very scary. And what we're saying is that, and I'm going to run you down to the costs here, is that it's actually going to cost us 87 grand to run that operation over the first 6 months for 0 revenue. So now we're starting to feed into stakeholder management, aren't we? We're starting to feed into stakeholder expectations. The typical conversation about building an SDR program is, we're going to hire some SDRs. It will cost us 30K a year per SDR. Okay, cool. What are they going to do? Well, we'll start to get some revenue in 3 to 4 months, and then we'll be making an ROI. The exercise we've just done has shown that it looks very, very different, Marco.
Absolutely.
So here we are, spending nearly 100K before we even win our first sale. And in fact, because we've got a 6-month sales cycle from the meetings that we sit in month 2 and book in month 1, our first revenue comes in month 8. What's interesting there, though, is you can't win 0.6 of the sale. So mathematically, it's impossible. Chances are, you and I both know, if it's going to take an average of 6 months, we could get lucky and win our first sale month 4, month 5, month 6. It's absolutely viable.
I think, sorry to interrupt. I think probably worth noting at that average sale value, 6 months, you're going to get some wins in that probably. So I think we've been nice and conservative there, haven't we, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we can pull that forward. And maybe for the sake of the exercise, let's run it where we can kind of artificially put that first sale in month 5. So we're booking meetings in month 6, sorry. So, it's taking 6 months. We're still running at a cost of 80, 90 grand, 100 grand before we start to make money. And what's interesting here is that, we're winning our first sale in 6 months. If you combine the sales that we're going to win across just the first year alone, it's 9 new clients, 9 new logo wins across the first 12 months. We're plateauing out at about 2 a month here, but you're taking a long time. You're taking a full 10 months to get to that point. And I think the point of using a tool like this is to demonstrate this is a marathon, not a race. So many people will dive out of their SDR outbound new program in month 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 before they start to see a return, before they start to see the metrics coming through. What's interesting here, though, is they get to the point where they're adding 34K of new business revenue, new logo wins revenue on a monthly basis. So, this SDR program is going to contribute £400,000 to £500,000 a year of committed revenue on this model once it's up and ramped. But it's going to take you a full 10 months before it ramps and gets to that point where it's doing that. It plateaus out about 20 meetings a month. 11 or 12 of those being sat and represented as opportunities, and then just under 2 of those clients a month becoming wins. But you've got to remember that this program costs you 11 grand a month to run. And of course, you've got the 10 grand setup cost just to get it off and running. So this is your sort of investment number that's ticking along. And you're seeing that to start with, you're getting to the point where you're running at 65 grand down before you win your first sale. It then starts to turn, moving in a profitable direction. So this.
And what's the end outcome of the year? So
end of year 1, you are up £43,000. So you've got £43,000 of revenue. Note this is revenue, not profit. So there's going to be a margin on that. So reality is it costs you money to run an outbound program for a year. Absolutely. Performing at this level. But what you get to is I'm now bringing in 35k of new logo wins every month on average, and I can run that forward consistently at a profitable level going into year 2. Owen, just conscious of time, can I just talk through a scenario very quickly? Go for it. If you just scroll left to the inputs where we put 12 calls per hour and a contact rate. Absolutely. So let's assume then you are Owen Richards, head of sales at the business that we've spoken about, and your SDR team. If you chucked in 9 calls an hour, see what that does, and then drop the conversion rate. So where we've got 8%, drop that to 4%. Flip back to the numbers and see what that comes out as, and then I've got a question for you. So obviously that's 7 meetings a month. I won't change this bit. This is the manual input, but 7 meetings a month it gets to, and at the end of the year we're winning. How many new clients are we winning across the year? We're winning 5 new clients across the year. We're getting up to the point where we're winning 12 and a bit grand of revenue on an 11 grand cost. And we're losing 41 grand across the year. Okay, so my second question is: if you were head of sales and you've got that SDR team performing at, a slightly less calls per hour, which is productivity, and 50% of what their conversion rate should be, what would you be doing? What would you be looking for? How would you be getting that performance up to the next level? Good question. So firstly, I'd be focusing on what are we asking them to do that's stopping them having more conversations. So data quality will impact on contact rate, learning, development, training, insight on the data. So do we get better results speaking to one sector over another? In which case, can we focus our attention on that sector? Because that gets you an overnight improvement. If you've got one set of data that works at 5% and one at 10, and you only phone the one at 10, well, guess not, overnight you move your average from 7.5, if it's a 50-50 split, to 10. So, there's some things like that. I'd honestly be looking at what's in their way, what's stopping them from making more calls or sending more emails, what's stopping them from being more productive. And then you've got to look at messaging and product market fit. You've got to look at what are you saying, how are you saying it. You've got to do call coaching with them, helping them understand what their job is, which is ultimately sell the meeting. Absolutely. It's an interesting point. It's an interesting point, though, isn't it? The commercials are there. Nothing's changed in terms of average sale value cycles, but it is literally down to the performance of the SDR team. Absolutely. And this is the scary thing, because we've got such a difference there in the end result based on, let's just scroll back over, based on fairly small differences. So on an hour by hour basis, or even if you were to break this down day by day, the difference between someone making 9 calls and 12 calls an hour, you could argue it's fairly nominal. You could say, look, it's okay, it was a bad week, it was a bad whatever. And the difference between 8% and 4%, okay, it's 100% difference. But the point is, you could easily fly under the radar running for a couple of months, absolutely, and write it off as a bad month or a bad couple of months. If I go back to our original example, though, I would argue that most businesses who hadn't had the right stakeholder conversations would be bailing in and around here. They'd be looking and saying, we haven't won any sales yet. We've invested £63,000 in this program and not won any revenue, or we've won 1 client. We're not getting the results that we want. And where people need to be looking at is this: are we getting enough meetings that we can trust the process to flow through? Are we getting the quality of meetings that we can trust the process to flow through? And are we having the quality of conversation that allows us to continue that level of performance? Because, hey, here's the kicker. Look what it does in year 2. It generates 600k worth of revenue because there's no ramp period, and we generate £326,000 of revenue more than we invest in the program. So all of a sudden, here comes hero status for head of sales that built this department. But guess what? Most heads of sales are looking on an 18-month average tenure, are looking at an impact over 12 months. And I think the summary of all of this is that if you're looking for a short-term win, outbound probably isn't the right strategy for you internally, certainly. Potentially not externally either, because the cost to ramp it, the time it takes to ramp, the energy and effort it takes to maintain it means that it's a highly scalable and very profitable channel, 6, 9, 12 months and beyond. But that period to get there is hard and inefficient from a cost investment perspective. So if you haven't got your stakeholders on side with understanding that journey, you're setting yourself up for failure before you start.
Absolutely.
Marco, any final comments or things that you think we've missed across this before we wrap up?
Look, I think there's so much to discuss when looking at the ROI. Each topic you could talk an hour about, but I think, look, as an overall explanation and as a kind of walk you through the process, I think that's probably enough. I just want to say, look, if anyone's watching this and they've got concerns or they've got questions or ideas they want to run past either Owen or I, my box is open. Drop me a connection on LinkedIn, chat to me on LinkedIn. We can actually go through this together. I'll pump some numbers in for you. I can challenge your thinking and vice versa. So if there's anyone out there that's considering doing this internally or using an agency, feel free to drop me a line. But I think Owen, it was a good session. I like going through those kind of numbers.
Yeah, nice stuff. Look, James, here he is, Parksy. I think that answers most of the questions I sent the other day. Great show proposition, thank you. I've actually got an email in my inbox, which I saw this morning from James asking many of these questions, which James, if you're still watching, I'll get a response to you very soon, and Marco or I will pick that up with you. But hopefully you've learned something from this session, and this can help you with your journey as well. Marco, we're just over the hour. Thank you very much for your input today. I feel like we could have done another hour on this easily, but I think we've given a high-level overview, and the invite is there. If anyone wants to get in touch with either Marco or I to discuss how this might look for their business, whether that's just as a second opinion on something they're looking to do internally, or if they're considering building something like this with an outsourced agency, then of course we're here to help and here to talk. Marco, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And I'll end our live session now.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.
Cheers.